joining us. I'm Laura Cantrell. I'm the Executive Director of the Coastal Conservation League, and we're delighted to present this webinar that is focused on a more resilient Charleston and responding to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Seawall proposal. We're glad you're here. It's not an overstatement to say that our community is at a critical moment in an important process that is currently unfolding. As you likely know, the City of Charleston is considering a partnership with the Corps of Engineers to build a seawall around the Charleston Peninsula to address the impact and minimize the impact of flooding from storm surge. We all know that flooding is an existential issue and threat for our city and our region. And we also know that a proposal of this magnitude of what the Corps is presenting is of grave importance and deserves careful consideration. That's why the Coastal Conservation League, in partnership with the Southern Environmental Law Center, has identified an opportunity to bring to bear some excellent expertise in the field of resilient civil engineering. We hope to be able to engage this expertise to help enhance the Army Corps' proposal and to support, supplement, and enhance the city's effort in its official response to the seawall proposal. The purpose of this program is to give you a chance to hear about this expert capacity and how we hope to get these experts involved. So let me give you a quick overview of our program for today. In a moment, I'm going to turn it over to Jason Crowley, who is the Communities and Transportation Program Director for the Coastal Conservation League. Jason will set the stage by outlining where we are with the Army Corps process, with the seawall proposal, and where Charleston is in that process. After Jason, we're going to hear from Bree Sarte, who is the founder and CEO of SHERWOOD Design Engineers, along with his colleague, Tom Jost, who is a principal and director of strategic planning for the firm. Bree and Tom will share a little bit about their work and their approach, about work that they have already done with the Conservation League and the Southern Environmental Law Center related to the seawall proposal to date, and about the opportunity that we have to continue to work with them over the next several months to develop coastal resilient options that are sensitive to the unique cultural and environmental landscape that makes Charleston so special. After we hear from Bree and Tom, we will hear a brief word from Christopher King, the Executive Director of the Preservation Society of Charleston. It's important to note that in addition to the Conservation League's partnership with the Southern Environmental Law Center, we are part of a broader collaboration of organizations like the Preservation Society, the Historic Charleston Foundation, and a number of other entities and leaders in our community. After the presentations, we will have some time for Q&A. So at any point during the program, if you have a question, if you want to pose a question, you can type that question into the Q&A box that you should find at the bottom of this webinar window. We will get to as many questions as we can at the end of the presentations. So again, thank you for being with us. And with that, I will turn it over to Jason. Jason?
Thank you, Laura. Greetings all. Once again, my name is Jason Crowley, Communities and Transportation Director at the Coastal Conservation League. This past April, the Army Corps of Engineers, this past April, the Army Corps of Engineers released a draft feasibility report and environmental assessment to address coastal storm risk for the Charleston Peninsula. This study is the result of the federal planning process referred to as the 3x3x3 process, consisting of a study that costs $3 million to complete within 3 years and includes 3 concurrent levels of review. In Charleston, the Army Corps was tasked with identifying a buildable project to protect the peninsula from flooding caused specifically by storm surge. Following 18 months of data collection, modeling, and analysis, the Army Corps is proposing to construct a nearly 8-mile seawall around the perimeter of the peninsula, which would rely on at least 5 pump stations to be constructed to pump water outside the wall. The project also includes a 4,000-foot-long breakwater located offshore near the battery. A 60-day comment period followed the release of the Army Corps study in April, and Conservation League partnered with several environmental, historic preservation, and other community partners to help facilitate public engagement programs and get the word out, since the traditional engagement processes were disrupted by COVID-19. So where are we today, and where are we going over the next several months? Over the next several months, the Corps will be reviewing the comments and refining their plan. Incredibly, even during the pandemic, they received over 500 comments from the public. During this time, the city also has the opportunity to provide a formal response to the Corps proposal. In order to support the city with their response, last week, City Council voted to appropriate funding to bring the Dutch Dialogues team back to Charleston to assist city staff with their response. Several environmental and historic preservation nonprofits, including the Conservation League, along with a number of private businesses and individuals, matched the city's contribution to support these efforts. The report will be finalized after the city response, and the Army Corps will continue to refine their process. They will bring it back for a comment period again in the spring, in the beginning of 2020, and finalize the report at the end of 2021. It's critical, though, that the city develop a response that is in keeping with the parameters of the Army Corps purview, and however, be more attuned to the natural approaches of living with water that the Dutch Dialogues Initiative introduced to Charleston last year. Our goal today for building the financial capacity to also bring aboard Sherwood design engineers, who you'll be hearing from shortly, will help support and enhance the City of Charleston's response by providing additional insight, expertise, and ideas. While this effort is taking place, as mentioned, the Corps will continue to refine their proposal and release their second draft in early 2021 for the second round of public comments. And if we're successful in bringing Sherwood to Charleston, the Conservation League and the Southern Environmental Law Center will use Sherwood's final recommendations that we hope to be working with them on as an education and engagement tool with the public, to utilize with the public to help provide more robust feedback to the Corps during the second round of comments. We were lucky to work with the Sherwood team during the first public comment period with the Southern Environmental Law Center earlier this year, and Sherwood provided technical advisory services to the League and SELC, helping us craft the comments that we submitted to the Corps. And through this initial effort, the firm was able to get a good preliminary understanding of the unique challenges and opportunities for Charleston's peninsula and a more resilient future. What we learned is that one size does not fit all, and a concrete wall around the perimeter is not right for Charleston. Some of you may have seen a recent op-ed in the Post and Courier by local engineer Joshua Robinson, who identified the risks of implementing the Corps seawall as currently proposed. If you are not familiar with it, I encourage everyone to read the report and consider Robinson's arguments. Charleston's peninsula is very vulnerable to storm surge, but also vulnerable to flooding from rain events and sea level rise. As proposed, the Corps plan exclusively relies on gray infrastructure using walls, floodgates, and pumps to try and keep water from coming on land, something that Charleston has been unable to prevent for over 350 years. Interestingly, Robinson also notes in his report that the very creation of the peninsula occurred over millennia as a result of storms depositing sediment that eventually built up to create the original peninsula before humans began creating new land around the original land formation using fill material well into the 20th century. The single-purpose solution, however, won't solve the myriad flooding issues the city faces. But there's no need to reinvent the wheel to figure out what is best for Charleston and how we can all work together to refine the Corps proposal to develop a plan that is more appropriate for Charleston's needs. Last year, the community came together around the Dutch Dialogues Initiative, and several great ideas were introduced during that process to consider ways to work with nature to better capture, store, and release water that comes from land, or comes on land both from rain and storm surge. This serves as a great foundation to build off from as we continue to refine and work with the Corps to improve their proposal. Another interesting proposal came from two local firms, Biohabitats and DesignWorks, located here in Charleston, and submitted during the Army Corps' public comment period. Their proposal begins this very conversation of thinking differently about how to utilize natural and nature-based features to provide coastal storm protection on the peninsula without relying exclusively on gray infrastructure. This is another really interesting proposal to take a look at. If you aren't familiar with it, just Google Imagine the Wall. These are worthy ideas to continue to build off from and consider their functionality and feasibility. Charleston has done much to think differently about how to be more resilient into the future. And over the next several months, we have an opportunity to bring additional experts like Sherwood design engineers to the table to work with the organizations and institutions that are seeking equitable and feasible solutions to address our flooding risks on the peninsula that are multi-beneficial and consider all forms of flooding. I'm now going to turn things over to Tom Jost, a principal and director of strategic planning with Sherwood design engineers, who will go into a bit more detail about how Sherwood has worked on similar projects around the country, both in partnership and in parallel with the Dutch Dialogues team to address similar challenges facing Charleston today. Thank you very much for your time. And I'll now turn things over to Tom.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity, and it's a pleasure to speak to everyone today. If you could go to the next slide. I'm joined today by Brice Arte, our founder, who will also be part of this presentation. Sherwood Design Engineers is, we are in our second decade of existence. The foundation of our firm is focused on the integration of technical engineering with design aesthetic, recognizing that all solutions of a technical nature need to be thought about in the larger context of the environment, the social infrastructure, and the economics that drive decision-making. And so we provide nature-based, context-sensitive solutions of a technical nature. And increasingly, as we look at challenges of climate change, the word resilience is central to a lot of the work that we do. And our resilience mission is very much to adapt our coastlines and our riverine communities in places where we are challenged by flooding, and understand the larger context of all of the challenges brought about by climate change as we think about solutions. Next slides, please. What's important, I think, in thinking about this is that the Army Corps works within a process. The Army Corps has been, critical to the development of infrastructure throughout the country and are central to the federal government's ability to help communities. We want to partner in this process with all the folks that are working to respond to the Army Corps' 3x3x3 program. And we recognize that the Army Corps, in its efforts, are bounded by a lot of criteria, and they are asked and required to think about solutions in a very specific way. And in this case, the focus and emphasis of their effort is on protection of lives and protection of economy. It leads to a sort of singular problem to be addressed, and then gravitates to what can be a singular solution. And what we need to do in this process is think about all of those other influencing factors that are very much specific to Charleston, very much responsive to what is happening in terms of climate change in our society, and can influence the ultimate conclusions that the Army Corps is making in terms of how they want to protect. Can you go to the next slide? In working in this first round, as Jason mentioned, I think there were really four kind of critical responses that CCL and SCLC have really identified, and I think they're central to our thinking in terms of how we can work on this project. Obviously, the notion of the seawall is monolithic. It is, in a sense, a singular solution, and we need nuanced thinking. Opportunities to create protection that solves for multiple challenges and is much more directed at the localized scale, responding to particular neighborhood conditions and particular opportunities. Also, it's a very, very extensive effort. It's a very significant effort, and it has significant environmental impacts. And the feeling is that those impacts need to be addressed and assessed. And through that assessment of what are the critical environmental factors, a more rich and appropriate solution will be derived in terms of how we can approach the protection in Charleston. And as part of that, and Jason has alluded to this as well, you know, there is a process through the Army Corps 3x3 process of engagement. They have expanded that process to include additional opportunities for community response. Community response has been significant, but there's a larger dialogue taking place in Charleston, and there's a number of stakeholders of many different, you know, general community, advocacy groups, government, that are all trying to understand the challenge that we face here and how we can solve that problem. And so this is also about developing that larger engagement process, plugging into what is already being talked about, and helping to drive forward a consensus-based approach to how we are going to solve for resilience in Charleston. And then that notion that what we need to think about is that the Army Corps is focused on protection. We want to make sure that we're moving forward with a protection strategy, that we're in lockstep and looking to help garner the federal funds that Charleston needs, but that we can do this in a way that provides multiple benefits, that can look at more nature-based solutions and also really focus in on neighborhoods. Next slide. So how we think we can help this process is that by working within the Army Corps process for federal appropriation, we can address the current conclusions and enrich those conclusions in a manner that speaks to all of what we've been talking about today, the opportunities for a more rich and structured resilience solution that really provides a much more complete long-term resilient future for Charleston. And that really speaks to a process of solving for the primary challenge, but providing co-benefits and presenting to the Army Corps how that can work and how that can be incorporated within their structure of being able to fund the project. As part of that, though, we are looking to promote what we would call a cultural shift away from the notion of protection to adaptation. And that, you know, this process of adaptation is going to unfold over generations and over decades of time, and that we begin to think about adaptive solutions and what we would call layered approaches to solving for resilience. We don't really fully know the impacts of climate change or what we can expect 20 or 50 or 100 years from now. So we have to think about protection that can resolve and solve for what we don't yet know. And so we need to think about iterative layer protection, making sure that our risk is measured and not set in a single condition that may not ultimately work. So thinking about adaptation and layered solutions is very important. I think the other thing that we really want to try to accomplish here is to build a compelling narrative, provide alternatives that can be implemented in this process that begin to plug into and coordinate an overarching narrative of what is taking place with the Dutch dialogues, with the city of Charleston, with a lot of the folks that are already speaking up about what can happen here, and make sure that that dialogue helps to build consensus so that everyone is kind of moving forward with a consistent approach to how we can really make Charleston this great, wonderful, resilient 21st century city. And just, I have one more slide, if you could go to that. when you think about the wall and kind of the level of detail that's in the Army Corps report and the yellow or red line that you see, think of the wall as protection, but also in each of these communities, that protection and that notion of the wall can be expanded with a tremendous amount of both physical intervention thinking and also other approaches that expand beyond the physical to thinking about policy and thinking about future improvements. And so I think we have great opportunity here to take what has already been provided by the Army Corps and really expand upon it and enrich it and provide solutions that are going to be great for Charleston long-term, but also meet these goals of going beyond merely protection and solving some of the other key challenges that Charleston faces. And I'm going to turn the floor over to Bree Sarté, and Bree can talk about our history, the work that we've done over more than a decade working in communities like Charleston, and some of the relevance of that work to what we can do here.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Is the audio good? Great. Really appreciate this opportunity to bring our expertise to what is not a simple challenge, and frankly never is in this kind of a context with the really unprecedented and Herculean efforts that are required to address these really big problems. The Army Corps is coming from a good place to help, and in this context, having a third-party impetus to open up some other potential solutions can really help. And I want to just draw from some international work that we've been doing around this subject. But a lot of Sherwood's work on this topic started working with an international consortium led by Wagner and Ball and the city of New Orleans that sprung from the Dutch dialogues there, and really began with really thinking differently about water and this idea of living with water. In New Orleans, this is not an easy shift and has not been an easy shift to make, and it won't be in Charleston either. To redeploy the heavy approach to engineering that characterizes big infrastructure and most infrastructure projects to something that is more place appropriate is actually much harder process than might be characterized at the beginning. And so I don't want to downplay how big of a challenge we have ahead of us, but I'd also like to underscore the scale of the opportunity. These are multi-billion-dollar projects, and there is a real chance to get things right with a lot of extra care and a lot of extra effort. And having the kind of organization that is outside of government to help push for the right strategies can really make a big difference. And so New Orleans, if you go to the next slide, we started up these large-scale master planning moves that define 7 districts around New Orleans. And ultimately it has led to a series of implementation projects, the most recent of which opened in 2019, which was incorporated into a sculpture garden in City Park. And with a simple adaptation of the weir structure in the sculpture garden, we're able to store over 10 million gallons with every storm event in a beautifully integrated project. And this was maybe 0.5% of the total budget. This is a dramatic project in terms of how much flood storage is being able to be retained and stored in a distributed way in the city of New Orleans. And if you go to the next slide, these kinds of strategies that play out in a very specific and detailed way in the projects need a broader framework to fit into. Had we not spent time thinking holistically about the city of New Orleans, it would have been very hard to think strategically at the implementation stage to look for opportunities. So this combination of large-scale thinking and detailed implementation is something that we really would underscore and stress as a high priority for this community in particular. And I'd like to just highlight a couple other places where this has been an ongoing tension. The city of New York, as many of us know, with Superstorm Sandy, had to really renew their focus on how they address the waterfront. That's been a place from Long Island City to Brooklyn Bridge Park that we've had an opportunity to really think specifically and strategically about implementing a larger scale commitment and series of projects that allows the public to still really enjoy the waterfront, but create places that also can adapt over time. If we go to the next slide here, this Brooklyn Bridge Park was completely inundated in Superstorm Sandy. Several $1 billion of real estate were inundated behind the park. The park had just started construction at that stage, the very first phases. And what we found is while we didn't build to a full protection height before the storm, after that, we've started to build the subsequent phases to really allow for adaptation. So after the storm, the next 7 projects along the coast, we've been able to work in a seamless way, higher ground, places to quickly deploy flood barriers. And it's still one of the most loved and enjoyed parks that really serves a broad spectrum of New York's community, providing a lot of incredible programs for people to have first contact with beaches in the inner city and many other educational and environmental programs. So it's an example of a specific project with very intense development that's been able to adapt over time to embrace a new and higher standard, but also allow for extensive public interaction. Next slide just shows a few of the finer grain details and how coastal wetlands and historical elements and higher performing landscape and green infrastructure can all be woven in to a coastal protection project to bring beauty and softness to it, as Tom was describing earlier. Next slide. And I think with that, Tom, if you want to touch on any of the other kind of broader projects, but I also think maybe just underscoring the process that we went through in Bridgeport might be very relevant to some of the challenges and opportunities ahead here. Thank you.
Thank you, Bree. Can everyone hear me? I think Resilient Bridgeport is a really good project to speak about. We actually worked in parallel with the Dutch Dialogues process in Bridgeport. There were 2 components to funding post-Sandy in this region, and the first was rebuild by design. And the Dutch Dialogues effort proceeded to focus in on Bridgeport and really focus in on inland flooding and the challenges associated with low-lying areas that are collecting water, a significant challenge that is also very, very prevalent in Charleston. And then I led a team to write a grant for the state of Connecticut to garner $54 million to develop a coastal protection strategy that partnered with how do we solve for inland flooding. And so Bridgeport is a really good example of a wall that is built into the community that also handles inland flooding and has a strategy for cleaning and filtering the water that is behind the berm structure that we've constructed and bring it out into the Long Island Sound. So there's a big environmental component to it. There's a number of other elements to this in terms of thinking about the community itself. This is an isolated, disenfranchised community that was cut off from downtown Bridgeport. Part of what we're doing as part of the reconstruction is reconnecting that community as well, and reconnecting that community to the waterfront where it had been really disconnected. And so taking into account that broader spectrum of what is needed in a community, how do you use protection to really enhance the long-term resilience of this place? And so this berm, and if you just click on this slide, I think a yellow line will pop up. Yep. So that's actually a wall that's being built. We moved it inland for a number of reasons. One was that we could integrate it into a street, a piece of infrastructure that could be lifted, allowing for passage across it, but giving enough space to really create a public space, a public amenity in that area. We also used it as an opportunity to create a gateway into what is an Olmsted Park. And instead of building at the edge where there was a critical environmental asset and amenity, we used the opportunity to build what was a less expensive project further inland because we were on higher ground that allowed us to really protect and enhance a very important historic signature amenity in the community. And so this is a version of a wall that I think is emblematic of what we can achieve in Charleston by looking at infrastructure in a new way. And it also is, I think, representative of the kind of collaboration that we like to be involved with, where this is a project that has gone on for several years. It started with conversations around inland flooding, but then was able to connect that solution to a protection solution and not look at things in isolation, but look at opportunities collectively where different pots of money, federal and state money, can be brought together to enrich a project and most efficiently and effectively use the funds available. And so that's really important to us, to be able to think about what else is going on, understand how what work we can do can be fit into other opportunities, and really make the most of the investments that are being considered in the community. I think if you go to the next slide, that really concludes our presentation. We have done work locally in South Carolina. We're currently working for Horry County. Obviously, Florence was the third of 3 major impact storms, not coastal storms per se, but storms that created tremendous flooding, riverine flooding in Horry County. And it's a different issue to address, but some of the challenges are very similar. And they're working through a process now of trying to garner federal funds and create a long-term plan that invokes or envelopes the buyout process, but also thinks much more long-term about how do we really change how we approach what we're doing in Horry County so that we can continue to attract people to move to the community, to not feel at risk, to be safe, and to really generate long-term economic growth. And so I think, again, every place has its own context. Charleston has a very, very unique context that we're very kind of intrigued to be involved with. And our role here is to again, work with others, work with all of you, work with CCL and SELC and get their direction, and try to really make this process as beneficial to all as we can. So thank you for your time.
Great. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Bree. Hopefully you all can hear my audio. I would like to turn it to Christopher King to say a word. Christopher?
Thank you. Obviously want to thank Tom and Bree. That's really helpful and great information to sort of get the brains working. Can you all hear me okay? Great. Like everyone on the call, obviously we think it's critical that we've got to address the multiple types of flooding that impacts our city and region, but we've got to go about it the right way. And, you know, for us as a preservation organization, you know, we always look past and think about our history, but we're really focused on the future. And what we know is this is going to have a permanent impact on Charleston's character and quality of life going forward. And I think we've got to understand that we are talking about arguably the single biggest decision about Charleston's future. And I think what concerns me personally is our larger approach to flooding. After years of talking about this issue, you know, we don't have a prioritized list of projects. We don't have data that shows how flooding impacts us the most. You know, we can't say how many people are impacted. What is the negative impact on economic productivity of one type of flooding or flooding in one part of the city versus the other? And so we haven't fully addressed the various types of flooding that we experience, the sunny day flooding, the storm surge, the rain events, the development-driven drainage, just to name a few. So for us, we feel like we're lacking some of the context to evaluate the Army Corps plan. you know, in really going through that plan, there is an incredible amount of great and useful, valuable information in the work that the Army Corps has done. Their modeling, their economic assessments. I mean, these are resources that we have at our disposal. And I think what we're all trying to figure out is how do we take this great work that's been done and channel it in a way that supports what we all want to see, which is enhanced protections, but doing it the right way. I think for me, my concern with the Army Corps of Engineers plan is it asking the right question? Is moderate storm surge the #1 issue we have? And you know, if we proceed forward with this plan, it better be, because we're going to put all of our focus and all of our resources into this approach. So the Preservation Society, we've been working with the League and others to help promote public engagement. It's so critical. We're also working with the Army Corps of Engineers currently to help them develop visuals, which, to be honest, we should have had that during the public comment period, because you know, we can't make informed decisions without understanding the design and details of this proposal. And we understand the challenges to that, but we've got to push further down that path. We're also working with local and national partners to ensure, I think, the most rigorous standard of environmental and preservation review are undertaken. And there's work to be done there, and it's imperative that we get that right. But I think it's really our work, you know, working closely with community partners like CCL and HCF. You know, we all share the same ideals. We love this place, and we want to make the best data-supported decision for the future. So, you know, we all share concerns about the proposed approach. We all have maybe our individual takes, but, you know, we want to make sure that we get it right. You know, our concerns range from process, to get overly technical, to the impacts on the natural and the built environment. You know, we have concerns ranging from specific neighborhoods like Rosemont and Gadsden Borough to the larger ecosystem and the surrounding communities. So there's a lot more that we need to know to make informed decisions. So we're excited to see, you know, the local and national experts in engineering, hydrology, and design are already coming forward with alternative solutions and ideas and analysis. This enriches our understanding and really helps us as we move forward. You know, to know that experts in their fields are, you know, having the same thoughts and already, you know, expending a lot of their energy and resources is really encouraging, and we need to leverage that to our benefit. And that's what this is about. You know, we can do this by supporting Wagner and Ball's work with the city, but also by supporting outside of the box thinking, and that's what this is about. You know, and I think that this structure really supports a collaborative approach that's going to help us advance the city's work, but can also offer independent expertise to really push some broader thinking that might really enrich the city's process. So the Preservation Society, you know, we support a holistic and innovative approach to solve flooding, and we believe that meaningful collaboration is the way to do it. And so we're excited to be a part of the conversation and to see this all coming together. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Christopher. Audio, can you all hear me? Yeah, great. Okay, well, again, Christopher, thank you. And thanks to all of our presenters for providing such helpful information about opportunities we can pursue as a community to deal with the flooding challenges and to create a more resilient future for our city. You can see by this slide that we need your help. We're hoping that what you've heard today inspires you to help support the hiring of Sherwood design engineers. We need to raise $50,000 by the end of the month, by the end of July, to bring them on board. We're hoping that you can help. And I want to be clear that the Coastal Conservation League, any contributions that you make toward this effort will go directly toward a contract with Sherwood. If you believe that we need more options to the Army Corps Seawall proposal to improve what it needs to provide for our city and our future, please give what you can. If we had 50 people give $1,000, we would be there. But we hope you'll consider, and we hope you'll give what you can. The information about how to do that is on the slide. You can go online to the link that you see here. You can send a check to the address, our address also on the slide. And if you do send a check, put Sherwood study in the memo line on your check. As Bree said earlier, we have a chance to get this right, and all of us working together in a broad collaboration to leverage expertise, to build on good work that's already been done and concepts that can be taken into more specific and concrete recommendations is the opportunity that we have before us, along with facilitating broad and inclusive community engagement. We are all in this together. So we have some time for questions, and I know that we have a few questions that have been coming in. Again, if you haven't asked a question that you have on your mind and you want to type it into the Q&A box, we will try to get to as many questions as we can. And Jason, I think you've been monitoring the Q&As that have been coming in, so I'm going to turn it to you to moderate some questions.
Great, thanks so much, Laura. And again, yes, if you have any questions, this is a great time to submit them in the Q&A panel. We've got a couple already underway, and I'm going to start with the first question that was submitted, which is, will this effort result in a formal community benefits agreement? This seawall will definitely impact our local communities of environmental injustice. That's a great question, and I think I'm going to just go ahead and give my thoughts on that, and if any of the other panelists want to jump in, happy to have you join in. The first comment on that is, part of the advocacy that the Conservation League and several of the other organizations like the Preservation Society had raised during the initial comment period was the fact that it is very important to have as much community engagement and have as robust of a mitigation plan as possible for whatever the final design is of this project. This proposal will have significant impacts, not just on environmental resources or cultural resources, but on communities themselves. As proposed, there are two communities that specifically have a history of environmental injustice that were left outside the wall. Not that they wouldn't be getting any protection, but they were not included in the 8-mile wall. Rosemont and Bridgeview Terrace, or Bridgeview Village, were both identified, along with some other neighborhoods, including around in Wagner Terrace and over by the aquarium, were identified as having non-structural protection measures. But communities like Rosemont and Bridgeview and the east side and parts of the west side, for certain, have been the victims of environmental injustice over the years. And looking at the need for an environmental impact study, a more robust review process, enables the opportunity to identify the proper both environmental, cultural, and community mitigation measures warranted for a project of this scale. I am going to provide the opportunity for Tom or Bree, if you want to add anything to that, to signal that you'd like to speak up. Otherwise, if that is a sufficient answer, we can go on to the next question. Tom, you've been unmuted if you have anything that...
Well, I would just add that a community benefits agreement's a powerful tool, and I think there are a lot of different approaches that can be advanced to coordinate community process that I think are very valuable, that need to be considered. It is really a combination of localized measures that are thought about within the context of a much more regional strategy. And so you do have to really have a bit of a combination of grassroots considerations and very localized conversations on how to solve problems that then tie into a larger regional strategy to be effective. And so I think that it's a really great suggestion. I'm not as familiar with kind of the local context, and I think that's an important thing to consider. So I wouldn't know if that is the exact approach, but I think something along the lines of what you're talking about, Jason, in terms of an increased and kind of continuous community process here is very valuable. And I think the Dutch dialogues have shown that that process has really changed thinking in a lot of different communities, and kind of begun a process of having those kind of conversations where awareness and then action kind of follow. So I'm a firm believer that, you know, these are not easy solutions, and you can't leave people behind, and you need to be able to really get everyone on board to thinking about what are the right ways to move forward.
Great, thank you. This is going to be a question directed at either Tom or Bree. This is a question about the viability of using movable barriers like those in use on the Thames River in London, or large-scale flood gate system like that in Venice. What are your thoughts on large-scale infrastructure projects like that and their potential impacts or potential benefits in a region like Charleston?
I can certainly jump in on that. I think that movable barriers are probably going to be a part of any solution that you're thinking about in Charleston, and certainly part of the conversation. There are some challenges with movable barriers. There's a significant maintenance component to it. There's a process of installation and removal. When they become significant in size or in terms of how much coverage area they have, it can be challenging to use them as the solution. So, you know, thinking about removable barriers as a component of how we might work the system, I think is a really great concept, and something that we can think about in certain areas where you have very minimal room. And it's a very important access to the water that needs to be preserved, and you're low lying. Sometimes it can be the best solution, but widespread, it does engender some significant long-term costs, and can be very challenging in terms of the support mechanisms kind of needed, the infrastructure, the organizational infrastructure to make them work. And so I think it's a combination of thoughts. In terms of the larger barrier issue, and I'm not quite sure, I think what you might be talking about is really kind of a more remote protection mechanism, you know, further out from the peninsula. You know, that my only experience with that has been in New York, where they've talked about building a massive barrier like the Thames further out, and therefore not needing necessarily to build protection kind of at the edge or in water close to the edge. And you know, I think the challenge there is the timeline. How long will it take? How expensive will it be? What is the process for getting that done? You know, there are impacts taking place in Charleston right now. And so in the New York experience, while that conversation is continuing to percolate about maybe the opportunity of building a massive structure of significant cost, well above what would be like the $2 billion cost that we're talking about here, other actions are being taken to move forward to make sure that protection is happening. And that kind of gets into the layered protection strategy at a bigger scale. Thinking about what you can do with money that you have to help make improvements to make the community you have more resilient. If indeed a larger implementation is able to come to pass, we have to recognize that could happen in 20 or 30 or 50 years. And we can't rely upon that to be moving forward. And so we have to be thinking on different scales and in different locations.
Great. I'm going to blend these next two questions into one question for Tom or Bree. So the first part of this is in the Army Corps study, in the 3x3 study, there was sort of a question mark around the potential deflection of water if a storm surge is coming onto the peninsula or towards the peninsula, if it hits the seawall as proposed by the Army Corps, is there the potential of it to deflect off that wall or the breakwater in the harbor and force water onto land in the neighboring land masses of West Ashley, James Island, Mount Pleasant? So that's the first part of the question. Is, you know, that was sort of left as a Army Corps needs to do more analysis to determine that. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that as a potential risk. But more, I'd like to get your thoughts more on the opportunities and challenges that you see if we are to focus on a greener approach to providing coastal storm protection on the peninsula. How does our very low elevation provide a challenge to capturing, storing, and releasing potential water that could be coming on land through a more green approach?
Yeah, I can address some parts of these really complex and really important questions and considerations. I think number one, looking at a regional model for surge and how any barriers affect the surge is going to be critically important. The nature and characteristic and form of a wall will change the dynamics around it, as anyone familiar with coastal process can see when groins, which are big piles of rocks, are put out in the water, the way the sand forms around it changes within a year. Putting a large wall around a city, for example, is going to have regional impacts and influence. So we haven't gotten into that modeling, but certainly that needs to be considered. I think in terms of the second question or second part of the question here, this combination of how we manage water, both from rainwater runoff and increased high intensity storms that affect parts of the community today, becoming more frequent and more of a concern, really should be considered as part of this city scale water management strategy. And to look at the edge as not just how we're thinking about the water, protecting from the water that's coming in, but also part of a strategy for the water that's going out, how those two pieces come together as an integrated water management plan, we think is an incredibly important and really interesting opportunity. And that was part of why we showed that example in New Orleans, because it's this combination of urban runoff and peak storm runoff, as well as sea level rise, large storm surge, and other coastal processes that need to work together. So that edge, and being flexible with how that edge is defined. If it's a single wall, you're really wedded to pumps and gray infrastructure permanently. If you dedicate a larger width of land, it gives much more flexibility, even for the design for the public spaces to adapt over the centuries as these realities become clearer, as land uses become better known. And so buying time for flexible response is critically important as well as part of it. And so it is more complicated. It does take more land, but you can also get a lot more buy-in and also tap into broader pools of funding. The example we showed in New York actually had substantial private sector participation, was not just a public sector participation. The example in New Orleans had philanthropic participation as well as public participation. So looking at a more integrated and nuanced approach to these edge treatments can actually also, as Tom mentioned, provide broader funding streams, but ultimately help to protect the character and nature and experience of being on the edge of town or on the edge of your community, or as well as really the sensitive ecosystems that inhabit that border, which we haven't talked about a lot, but is a huge consideration.
Great, thanks. I am going to put Christopher King on the spot for this next question, and bear in mind he did let me know that he's having a little bit of internet problems, so if he does freeze or drop, we will move on. But Christopher, I wanted to direct this question to you because of the Preservation Society's ongoing advocacy and engagement and involvement with tourism and the necessity to identify every form of funding possible to address these major resilient needs. I'm curious if you have any insight as to the latest on the ability, one way or the other, to utilize accommodations or hospitality tax towards funding any type of resilience projects. And I think you may need to manually unmute yourself. There you go.
Thank you. To answer the question, the reality is we're talking about interpretation of state law, and there are, as there are with most things, varying opinions on it. I think in a lot of the research that's been done by the community, there's a strong belief that there is an opportunity to utilize accommodation taxes and some of the tourism-based dollars to really support projects like this, because really at the end of the day, this is the infrastructure that supports that industry. As many of the people on the call probably know, this has come up, and the city has sort of taken the position in line with Columbia that it cannot be used for that. And so I think it's important that we continue to push these conversations, because what we understand, whether we accept the Army Corps plan as proposed or whether we come up with a more creative solution, we're going to have to create additional revenue sources to fund it. That's been one of the primary points that's consistently come up in every conversation. So, we also look at things like the fact that there's a $300 million industry happening the end of Market Street with Carnival Cruise Lines that is not necessarily contributing to the city of Charleston.
I believe that Christopher froze.
How the city works and how we can leverage all of these for the benefit of this conversation.
Great, thank you very much. Tom and or Bree, I'm going to direct this question to you, one of you. This would have been a great opportunity to have your colleague Blair on the line for this, but I'm wondering if you could give any insight on the current ability for and how Congress might appropriate fundings. If this project, the 3x3 project, were to be completed, sent to Congress, how likely is it that Congress would vote to appropriate the funding necessary? Is that a purely political thing? Are we in line behind other projects? Is there a funding need to do projects ahead of us? You might not be the right people to ask that question, but if so, just say pass.
I'm going to largely pass, but it's very, I can, certainly the normal federal process that, unfolds does dedicate, funding for specific projects. You then go through a process of evaluation. The fact that the Army Corps has conducted the 3x3x3 report illustrates that there is a priority here. I think that we have to recognize that we need to continue to proceed and try to make this effort one that can really work to ensure that we can continue to be in line for funding. I can talk to two experiences of two projects I've worked on. One was the Living Breakwaters project in New York post-Sandy, and the other was Resilient Bridgeport. Both of those have made it through the environmental process, made it through the design process, have garnered authorization. It came in 3 tranches of money at 3 stages. We met the guidelines for those 3 projects, and the first Living Breakwaters is in construction, and the second Resilient Bridgeport is in final design now. So I think there is a process. There are steps that need to be taken. You are right. We have folks on our team that have worked at the Army Corps for many years and know this process extremely well. So we can certainly, I guess, provide a more detailed response to what those steps are in this particular case in response to that question, so that people have a better understanding of what are the actions that are going to need to happen as we move forward.
Great, thank you. I just want to take a moment to say it looks like new comments are not really rolling in. We have the floor until 1, and it looks like we're down to our last about 4 comments. So if folks need to tune off, understand and thank you for being here. If you are interested in getting through these last couple of comments, we'll keep moving forward. I just wanted to do a time check and just let everyone know that it is 12:30, and we will be wrapping up these last few questions soon. If you do have additional questions, submit them now. So this next question, I am going to take the first stab at answering it and turn over after to Tom and Bree to give any insight as to your thoughts on this. So the question is that an acknowledgement that there are some areas around the peninsula that were left out of the wall. I mentioned earlier from the first question that there are 2 historically African-American communities that were left out, but there's also the Gadsden Borough area over by the aquarium and where the new African-American Museum is being built that is left out of the wall. And then there's also Lowndes Point up near the top of Wagner Terrace left outside of the wall. The Army Corps identified those areas to receive non-structural measures. From the report and their response, those areas were identified to be outside of the wall due to the fact that for Lowndes Point and the Gadsden Borough areas, that they are newly constructed areas that already meet FEMA flood standards and the city freeboard requirements that requires buildings to be elevated above FEMA standards. And so from the Army Corps' perspective of doing their feasibility study, the wall does not provide any benefits of protection because they are already above the flood level. That, of course, does raise the concern of if the floodgates have to close before a storm, those communities will be outside the wall. So the question would be, how do they get into the rest of the neighborhood, and does that potentially create a risk of having people on the wrong side of the wall if an event does occur? So Tom and or Bree, I want to open up the dialogue to you all. If we are thinking about this and refining this approach and looking at opportunities to utilize more natural and nature-based features without exclusively relying on gray infrastructure, how could we look at some of these areas that were identified as being outside of the wall, quote unquote, and have them be incorporated into the community, and integrated in without this being an in or out or one side or the other approach?
Well, I think it's, this could actually be viewed as an opportunity, right? Especially edges of neighborhoods that are high could be some of the first projects that don't need such a large intervention. Maybe 2 to 3 feet of protection become very easy to accomplish with non-structural and more passive measures. And in particular, prioritizing a disadvantaged neighborhood in terms of infrastructure investment and phasing, I think could be a really powerful first move. So, this is, I think, an area that can be thought of as an opportunity to build upon and to really start with any kind of broader investment and showcase, because the plan is just the beginning. The implementation is going to roll out over a number of years, and starting with the community, where you can really provide meaningful community benefits, open space, public space, restoration, ecological amenities, without the heavy lift that might be needed in some of the other areas where the land is lower, can really help to increase buy-in and also show prioritization through projects. And then I think specifically the terrestrial flooding component should be considered, because the nature of having higher ground often means that storm runoff overland might be getting trapped behind those areas. So that's something that we'd want to look at in a holistic way.
Great, thanks so much. These are a couple of questions that I'm going to merge into one sort of general statement and then open up the floor. So I was just sent a question that had been put in the comments section instead of the Q&A section, which I can't read the comments section because of my screen share being on with the PowerPoint. But there was, several questions are going to be looped into one statement. One question was, how will Sherwood work with the city and Dutch dialogues folks? Another question was, how will you tap local expertise in the Charleston area? And then another question was, has the Conservation League looked at and considered the Robinson studies? So if you came in late, we actually did talk about the Robinson study during the presentation. So yes, I believe that the Robinson design engineers really laid a good foundation of what is at risk of the status quo if it is simply a one-size-fits-all approach. And that really emphasizes the importance of needing to really take a detailed and nuanced approach of looking at different areas in different ways, which is something that the Imagine the Wall team did really well in their response to the core that they put on their website, Imagine the Wall, I believe .com, it might be .org, but if you Google Imagine the Wall Charleston, it'll come right up. But the peninsula is not a landscape that deserves and can have a one-size-fits-all approach. Different areas of the peninsula require different interventions because there are different needs. The Lockwood corridor, for example, has very different resilience needs than the Battery versus the area along the east side versus Wagner Terrace. And that's why it is so important to be looking at all of these different areas, and why Robinson design engineers really identified that risk of doing just one simple, essentially as Joshua Robinson pointed out, a dam to try to keep water out instead of in that instance. So in relation with the city and Dutch Dialogues efforts, our opportunity to bring Sherwood on board with us is to provide an opportunity for more enhancement and support of the city's efforts to do their formal response with the Dutch Dialogues team. They have a very short window to provide the city response, where we hope to be working with Sherwood over a longer period of time. And because of their background and history of working together with the Dutch Dialogues team, they have the ability to collaborate and knowledge share and contribute to the city's response in a constructive manner. All of this is intended to build on top of the work that has already been done, the work that needs to be done, and continue after the city's response, continue to be refined and enhanced to have the community have the opportunity to also have the tools and language at hand to be able to provide your comments when the second round comes up in early 2021. And the question about tapping the local expertise, I will speak for myself, but allow the Sherwood team to join in after me. But it is really dependent on the local people that work in this area every day to be able to come to the table with us and share the knowledge that they already have assembled. There are no singular experts in this town who have all of the answers. Everybody contributes an aspect of knowledge and information that creates the best solution possible. And that's why it is so important to also tap experts from other places that have done this work to bring that outsider's perspective, but also to be able to listen to the folks that are already here to contribute to that work, which was why it was my goal to identify the work that has already been done by some of our other local partners in the area as that foundation to keep building off from. And I'll pause my comments and open the floor to Tom, Bree, Laura, or Christopher to weigh in. And we'll also have that be the final remarks from the panelists. That appears to be the last question in my list. So I will turn it over to Tom. You've unmuted yourself first.
Well, I mean, Jason, I think you've really accurately talked about the condition here. I've worked with the Dutch Dialogues team most recently in Houston. I'm very familiar with the people who are involved in the Charleston project. We are highly collaborative by nature, as are they. And I think we recognize that there's a tremendous amount of work being done, and we really want to build upon that work and partner with the local process and start having those conversations as soon as possible. And to that end, you've already the CCL and SCLC have put us in touch with Joshua. We had a chance to meet with him. He downloaded his perspective, why he wrote his report, some of his just underlying incredible knowledge of Charleston, already extremely helpful in getting us a better understanding of context. We can't do our work really without plugging into what the local people here are doing. And so we plan to make sure that that's critical to the effort that we're putting together. We want to be as valuable as possible. Our firm is the people that work at our firm are there because of our ability to get involved in projects where we can make a difference, and that drives the rationale behind why this company was formed and why people come to work for us. And so a project like this, an opportunity to be involved in this, is something that we take very seriously, and we want the best solution to come out of this. And so being able to plug into biohabitats and Wagner and Ball and the Water Institute for the Gulf and Joshua Robinson and others that are already working here are only going to inform and improve our ability to develop alternatives. And so I think that kind of to answer that question, it's already happening in a sense. And I think we have to continue to make sure we communicate often to understand exactly what the Dutch Dialogues is producing for the city. And I don't know exactly what their scope is and exactly what they plan to produce, but to make sure that we're not being repetitive with that, but that we're enhancing and building on top of what they're doing. And obviously integrating and connecting with others that are thinking about this. I think the more people that we can effectively bring into the conversation in a manner that can be helpful, the better off we all are going to be.
Thanks, Tom. Couldn't have said it better. And I just want to commend the Coastal Conservation League in tackling this challenge. Charleston is lucky to have this kind of community-based support. And, you know, honestly, I wish San Francisco had an organization like this, because tackling the seawall in San Francisco has been very delayed and complicated because there's not a very, very clear organization like this. And a lot of cities lack that. And I honestly was not asked to say this today, but I think it's incredibly promising in terms of the challenge ahead to have a group like this that cares this much and has this level of sophistication to jump into the issues, because a lot of coastal communities really don't have that. And it gives me a lot of hope that Charleston really can come through with something meaningful and provide a real framework for all the stakeholders that Tom just mentioned to really demand accountability from these big investments and make sure that it's really spent wisely and well in this community. And it's not easy work. Like everybody who's on this call, keep showing up and keep rolling up your sleeves. It's going to take time, but it's worth it. So thanks for including us in this conversation today.
Bree, thank you for those kind words, and thank you for your interest in being part of this work. I want to be respectful of folks' time, so we'll wrap it up. Thank you for joining us, for hanging in there longer than the appointed time, and thank you very much for considering being part of the community support that we need to bring Sherwood on board. We appreciate your interest and your willingness to consider helping us. And as has been said, I'll just put a finer point on it. Should we be able to bring Sherwood into this work, they will not be working in a vacuum. They are collaborative in their approach. They are part of a broader network of experts and colleagues that will be working together, be they folks from beyond Charleston or the local expertise that we have here. So more capacity is a good thing. The clock is ticking. It's going to be hard work, as Bree just said, but it's important work, and it's worth it to ensure that we have a great and resilient future for our city. So thanks again. We'll follow up with an email from those of you who've joined us.